I've been hearing a lot about Islamism in the last few days, and it's very strange because Islamism wasn't talked about in the 90s or even in the early 2000s. It was radical Islam, or it was Islamofascism, or Islamic terrorism. And then gradually, along with the word Islamophobia, and now Muslimness, whatever that means, Islamism has crept into the dictionary. And what people say it means is political Islam. And I'm going to ask a genuine question tonight, because if that's the case, if political Islam is a minority sport and there's only 1 or 2% of the population practice it, we've nothing to worry about. There's nothing to see here. We can move along. It's a few nutcases going out on the streets, making a whole lot of noise. There is no threat to the stability and cohesion of the United Kingdom because of Islamism, if it's a small, tiny minority sport. But I am skeptical about that, to say the very least. And I'm going to give you the reasons why I'm skeptical. We're led to believe that there's around 6 million Muslims living in the UK. It could be higher, could be up to 10 million, but we don't know. We're also led to believe that there's a massive demographic time bomb about to go off, where there's the Muslim population is growing faster than any other population in the United Kingdom. They're having more children. There's more Muslims under 25 than there are older Muslims, and the population of the Islamic community is going to be very, very substantial by 2030, 2035. That's what we're being told. But of course, if all those people are completely integrated and they're following British laws, British traditions and British culture, well, there's nothing to worry about. But what if they aren't? And what's the evidence to prove that it is just a tiny minority of people that believe in what the Islamists believe? Because what do the Islamists want? The Islamists want the whole world under the caliphate, under Islamic rule, ruled by the Sharia, ruled by the Quran, the Hadith, and the different traditions of Islamic law, and submitting to Allah. Submitting to Allah. That's what the Islamists want. So how many people in the UK are Islamists? Well, there used to be polling on a fairly regular basis. Since 2016, that seems to have stopped because there was a catastrophic poll for the people that are saying there's nothing to see here and there's nothing to worry about amongst our Muslim neighbours in terms of what they believe and what they want. Well, in 2016, after a long series of polls going right the way back to probably before 9/11, we got the answer to the question, how big is the threat from Islamism? Now, we're not talking about violent terrorism here. I'm talking about people who, by whatever means, whether it's political or physical, gain control of a country and submit it to Sharia, to Islamic rule, and it becomes part of the Ummah and the Caliphate. So what's the percentage? 2016, 43% of Muslims want Sharia law. Is that a small minority? Is that a tiny number of people? I don't think it is. In London, it's worse. In London, it was 49% of people wanted Sharia law. Is this tiny minority of Islamists that we're told about? The media all the time, oh, the vast majority of Muslims don't want Sharia law. They don't want anything to do with it. They just want to get on with their lives, and they're not interested in political Islam or Islamism. 49% in London are. 43% in the rest of the country are. That's the polling. You know, these polls are scientifically carried out. And actually, polling on these sort of matters, normally people just play down what they really want because they don't want to be seen as extremists. They're always worried that maybe the pollsters aren't what they seem, and the information on them is going to somewhere a bit more suspicious. When the Danish cartoon controversy happened, there was polling done on British Muslims. 77% of them were highly offended. And there was a very large percentage, I forget exactly the percent, there was a very large percentage of Muslims wanted the people who had drawn those cartoons to be punished. But what about the present day? Again, there's no real polling on a broad basis, but there's a group called the Muslim, I think it's the Muslim Labour Network, got polling carried out by a reputable polling company on what was the most important issue facing the Muslim community at the next election, and what would be the most important issue that would affect their vote and how they actually vote at the next election. 70% of Muslims polled, I think it was a Salvation polling company that carried out the poll, 70% of them said the Hamas-Israel war was the most important issue to them. Now, when you think about that, these are British Muslims who live in Britain. Many of them have been brought up in Britain. They've never been anywhere near Gaza. They've never been anywhere near Israel. But this was the most important issue to them. And then when we see hundreds of thousands of people on the street, and you hear the people in the media saying, well, they don't all support Hamas. Do they not? How do you know? When people stand at the side of the road with Israeli flags, Union Jacks, English flags, whatever it is, those people are attacked. When they stand there with placards saying Hamas is a terrorist organisation, those people are attacked, violently attacked. And of course, it's the police that carry off the protesters who are peacefully doing a counter demo, and arrest them and charge them, and let the real villains of the peace go, because it's easier. We talked about that in the last video. But the point is, one, we don't know if it's just a small minority of those crowds that support Hamas, because again, the evidence would show that that's not the case. There's a large number of people support Hamas. And the other thing is, where is the outcry from the mainstream Muslim community, this silent majority that we're told about, that we've just seen doesn't exist, this silent majority speaking out against these protests and against the intimidation of Jewish people and against the terrible cries for genocide and the horrendous placards and the anti-Semitism? Where's the cry from the mainstream Muslim community against that? It's non-existent. It is non-existent. And as we're going to look at the denominations of Islam in the UK, and maybe that will put a bit of meat on the bones why many people in the Muslim community think like they do. Remember, they are a very religious people. They believe the Quran. They believe that Muhammad was the last prophet. They believe what they're told in the mosque. So let's try and unpack this whole idea of the denominations in the United Kingdom. And I'm going to start off with three. I'm going to start off with the Deobandi, the Salafi or the Salafists, and Maududi-inspired mosques. So who are the Deobandi? Well, the Deobandi are what's called a Muslim reform movement. They started in the late 1800s. I think it was in India, and spread right the way throughout what is now Bangladesh, Pakistan, different parts of India. They're still strong in India. They're still very strong in that area as a whole. And obviously up into Afghanistan as well. When mass migration happened from the Indian subcontinent to the UK, the Deobandi came with them. The Deobandi mosques came, and the Deobandi imams came with those people that came across the UK, and they built their own mosques. So what does it mean to be a reformist Muslim? It means they go back to the Quran, they go back to the Hadith, they go back to the life of Muhammad, they go back to what they see as a pure form of Islam. And of course, we know that when Islam started, 1400 years ago, it started with the sword. It started with violence. Muhammad tried preaching peacefully, it didn't work. So then the sword was used, intrigue was used. Muhammad was a warlord. There's no doubt about that. If you read the Hadith and the life of Muhammad, the biographies of Muhammad, it's very obvious. He was a violent man, and he used violence to get his way, and he used violence to coerce and get people to do what he wanted. So the Deobandi, the Salafi, Maududi-inspired mosques are trying to get back to that early form of Islam, what they see as a pure form of Islam that's based on the teachings of Muhammad, based on the Quran, based on what those Muslims did in the very, very early days. And when you look at what ISIS did, ISIS, the Salafi mosques, you want to know what the Salafis are? ISIS were a Salafist movement. And not every Salafi is violent. Not every Deobandi is violent. The Salafis inspired ISIS, and ISIS was a Salafi jihadist movement. And they did exactly what the book told them to do. They beheaded, they killed Christians, they killed Jews Well, there weren't any Jews left in Syria by the time the ISIS got going, but they killed a lot of Christians. And in Iraq and Syria, and this has been going on for a long time before ISIS came along. Al-Qaeda in Iraq did exactly the same thing, butchered people. I'm not even going to go into it, but you can imagine the most horrific ways, very similar to what happened on the 7th of October. It's also happened in Nigeria with jihadist groups like Boko Haram, ISIS-inspired groups in West Africa, East Africa, right the way across that belt, right the way throughout Syria and Iraq. And these people were inspired by this idea of the reform movements, getting back to the book, getting back to what Muhammad did, and literally taking what those authentic hadiths tell them to do, taking literally what the Quran tells them to do when it comes to conquering and winning by the sword. Remember, there are over 100 verses of the sword in the Quran that have not been abrogated, so they're still viable today, let's say. So these reform movements make up Deobandi. The Taliban came out of the Deobandi movement. The Deobandi make up 38% of mosques in the UK. Okay? Deobandi gave birth to the Taliban. The Salafists make up 8% of mosques in the UK. The Salafists gave birth to ISIS. Maududi inspired mosques make up 3% of the mosques in the UK. Maududi was a scholar, an Islamic scholar, again a reformer that wanted to go back to the Quran, wrote books about jihad, about violent jihad. I've read them. He influenced Sayyid Qutb, who's called the grandfather of modern day jihad. He inspired Al-Qaeda, inspired Hamas, inspired the Muslim Brotherhood. I believe he was executed in the 1960s, I think that was right, in Egypt. So that makes up 49% of the mosques in the UK. Let that sink in. 49% of the mosques in the UK, their brethren, the people who are connected with them throughout the world, have been involved in the Taliban, ISIS, Al-Qaeda, Hamas, the Muslim Brotherhood. 49%. It used to be slightly higher. The next group of mosques, and I don't know anything about this group, so I can't comment about what they believe or what the doctrine is. In the mosque directory, they're called mainstream Sunni. Are they conservative Muslims? I genuinely don't know. They make up 12.5%. The next group I want to look at is the Barelvi. Now, we were always told the Barelvi were kind of a bulwark against the radical jihadists. But there's a very infamous case of a murder of an Ahmadiyya Muslim in Glasgow by a Barelvi fanatic who went up there and killed him because the Ahmadiyya have some strange ideas about who the last prophet is, and apparently there's more prophets come along since Muhammad was on the scene. And this Barelvi man took exception to this, went up to Glasgow and killed the fella. Now, am I saying all Barelvi are violent, or all Deobandi, or all Salafis, or all Maududi inspired? No. The Barelvi, the reason that the Barelvi guy went and killed the Ahmadiyya Muslim was because in their book, in their way of understanding things, Muhammad is almost worshipped like a god. He is revered. The Barelvi have such a respect for Muhammad that if you insult Muhammad, you're in big trouble. And what this Ahmadiyya had done, according to them, or according to this guy that killed him, was insult Muhammad. So again, it's not like this is a very, very chilled out sect where they're not extreme in any way. They'll be fairly relaxed when it comes to not forcing jihad on the country, or not trying to force political Islam on the country, possibly. But if you say anything about Muhammad, they're going to go nuts. And remember, if they think Muhammad is the perfect man, the Barelvi, if they think Muhammad is the one that they should emulate, Muhammad married Aisha, his wife, his child bride, when she was 6 years old. He had sex with her, raped her, when she was 9 years old. And of course, you speak to Muslims about that. They say, "Oh, it's different. She was mature. She was a mature woman, and her parents gave consent and all this sort of nonsense." No, it's child abuse. So when you look at the grooming scandal, you think these people, and again, I don't know how many people that were involved in the grooming with Deobandi or Barelvi, I'm not sure, and maybe people switch between the different denominations. But if you think Muhammad is the model man and you should live your life like Muhammad, then you're not going to have a problem being a paedophile and raping young girls, because that's what your denomination teaches you and tells you is the way to live. Because there's nobody disagrees. If you speak to serious Muslims who take the Quran and the Hadith seriously, none of them dispute the fact that Aisha was 6 when she was married and 9 when the marriage was consummated. None of them would dispute that. Maybe a few Shia would, but it's just not what mainstream Islam believes. They believe that she was 6-year-old when she was married and 9 years old when Muhammad had sex with her. So could that be a reason, one of the reasons that there's so much grooming goes on within the Muslim community? Of course, there's also the other idea, the other tradition that they have of Muhammad killing a Jewish, I think it was a Jewish warlord, taking his wife and raping his wife the next day, or marrying his wife as the Islamic tradition has it. So when you look at that and you think about what's gone on in the Muslim community, you go, is that the reason why that's happening? And I'm asking questions. I'm not accusing people of being fanatics. I'm not accusing people of being jihadists. I'm not accusing people of raping girls because of what's in the Hadith and what's in the other traditions about Muhammad. But we've got to ask those questions. And the problem is most people in the UK do not understand religion and do not understand how religion can be used to justify all sorts of horrendous, heinous activities and heinous behaviours. And Christianity has been used to justify some terrible behaviour as well. But you can never look at Christ and say, well, Christ did this or Christ did that. But when you look at the life of Muhammad, you can certainly say, oh, well, Muhammad did it, so it's okay. It's a very dangerous thing, isn't it? Very dangerous thing. And finally, I think about 4 to 6% are Shia in the UK. It's not a massive proportion. But again, if those people are involved with Iran, involved with what's happening in the Iranian regime, they can have a lot of influence and there can be a lot of power brought to bear there by people who are probably influenced by the Iranian Revolutionary Guard. So to wrap this up, it's been a long video, longer than I wanted it to be. But to wrap it up, it seems to me very clear that there are massive problems with Islam in the UK. And to just term it as Islamism and say there's nothing to see here, most Muslims are absolutely fine. Most Muslims probably are fine. But the reality is 43% of them want Sharia law. That's in the UK as a whole. 49% in London. 70% are so vexed about Israel that it's their main issue in the upcoming election. You've got a sect there, the Barelvi, who almost deify Muhammad. They almost worship him. They venerate him very, very greatly. And that's their belief, okay? But obviously, things will come with that because of who they believe Muhammad was and what he did. So if they want to be like Muhammad, they will behave in a certain way. And then you've got the Deobandi, Taliban, Salafis, ISIS, Maududi-inspired, Sayyid Qutb, Al-Qaeda, Boko Haram, Muslim Brotherhood, Hamas, all came out of these reformist movements. So there is a problem. It's not a violent problem at the minute, thankfully. It's not a violent problem. But we've got to ask serious questions about what's going to happen with the demographic time bomb, with everything that's happening politically in the UK. And again, there's some very astute people in the Muslim community who want to have an Islamic state and want to have the UK under Sharia law. And they are working night and day to make that happen. And the question is, what does the rest of the community in the United Kingdom, Jew, Christian, atheist, Hindu, Sikh, what do we do to stop that happening and to keep our beautiful, peaceful country free from something that would be catastrophic and that would end so badly for everybody. So that's a big question. I don't have the answers. All I've done there is put some stats, some facts to you, and asked some questions. It's up to you to make your minds up. See you all soon.